Season 2, Episode 88 of One Man's Opinion. Today I am reviewing Connecticut Repertory Theater's final show of the season with a pretty rough production of Jonathan Larson's groundbreaking musical Rent, directed by Nate Bertone and running through April 30th at the Neighobrs Theater at the University of Connecticut at 820 Bolton Road in Source, Connecticut. Rent is a musical that I have held with a certain inner conflict over the past decade or so. Back in the mid-90s, I was captivated by the rock musical and would have easily defined myself as a Rent head, playing the cast album on repeat while taking long cross-country drives from my then home in Arizona and college in Kansas. Seriously, nothing hits like listening to Santa Fe and What You Own while driving through the New Mexico wilderness. The musical themes of finding life in the midst of people dying from the AIDS epidemic hit real to me, though I never knew anyone at that point who had AIDS or knew anyone who was openly gay at that point in my life. Even then, at 19, living in two very conservative states, I was seeing the imbalance of cultures and how artists would want to flee oppressive pockets of the country to celebrate the world as they see it with like-minded people. It's a big reason I moved to New York City in 1998. Based on Giacomo Puccini's opera La Bohème, Rent follows filmmaker Mark, played by Robert Liniak, his musician roommate Roger, played by Carlos Fruzzetti, and their collection of friends who are living in Alphabet City in the East Village of New York City. The night that I was in attendance, Fruzzetti was not present, so I had Roger's understudy, Danny Kelly, playing the role. When their former roommate Benny, played by Ammon, who has married his way into wealth, comes to visit, they are given the proposition of fulfilling all their needs as artists if they convince Mark's ex-girlfriend Maureen, played by Elizabeth McManus, to cancel a performance piece in the neighboring vacant lot, protesting Benny's father-in-law's intention of clearing out the homeless and local struggling artists to build condominiums. In all of this, Roger, the girl he meets that night, Mimi, played by Kira Presmack, his and Roger's friend Collins, played by Tony King, and Collins' new lover, whom he meets that night as well, Angel, played by Owen Ing, all are HIV positive. All of the first act takes place on a Christmas Eve night in the mid-90s, while the second act takes place on different holidays throughout the following year. It can be argued that Rent has quite a few narrative flaws, of which I agree there are plenty. What starts in the first act as an engaging character study of the New York bohemian culture struggling through the AIDS crisis turns into a show that has a major second act problem, as the second act jumps through time and not giving the characters time for development. We're expected to accept that this is where everyone is in that moment and move on. At this point in seeing Rent, I also need to remind myself that I once was 20 as well, and that young adults have a greater propensity to act on impulse and fight against what they see as injustices, and fight for whatever noble cause they may have, even to their own detriment, something the protagonists do frequently throughout Rent. As for Connecticut Rep's production, I mostly like the design, particularly Elizabeth Olsen's concept of wrapping the whole Neighobrs Theater in the environment of the musical. The performances were overall rough, though. Many of the vocals had pitch issues, and when the songs got complicated, like Will I and Christmas Bells, vocals dropped as people were unsure of where they were supposed to be singing and what. There were a couple of good turns in Rent. Liniak is a pretty solid mark. He comes off a bit more nerdy than I'm used to for the role, versus being a smart aleck auteur filmmaker, but it mostly works. I would have liked him to have been a bit more aggressive in his lines of admonishment, especially towards Roger and Benny. He drops the intensity when he gets angry versus raising the stakes, muffling the tension. King is a great Collins, and his chemistry with Ing is sweet. Though King has some vocal issues with the first act, I'll Cover You, he makes up for it in his acting. The biggest problem with this production of Rent was a lack of energy overall by the cast, with a couple exceptions mentioned above. The opening number, Rent, was extremely flat and disengaging. It wasn't until the song Santa Fe that I felt that the cast's energy started to catch up and find the stride that they needed for the show. Though there are flaws in the narrative and the cast is generally lackluster, Rent holds a place in my heart still, mostly due to it being one of the linchpin shows that had me fall in love with theater. This production has good elements, but it needed a lot more energy and a bit more work on the music. But I'm only one man's opinion, so be sure to leave yours in the comments below. If you'd like to see Rent, I'll leave a link in the description. You can support my channel by becoming a patron over on Patreon. I'll leave a link for that in the description as well. You can also support my channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing, and click the notification bell to be alerted to future reviews. My next review will be the Broadway production of Prima facie. Thank you for watching, and I will see you at the theater.